It's time for Political Buzz, the television forum to discuss politics and issues of interest for all of Western New York. Now, from the WBBZ television studio at the Eastern Hills Mall, this is Political Buzz.
Hello, everybody. John DeSciullo here with you. We have a great studio audience at our Eastern Hills Mall studio, and we're happy that they're here. It's kind of a special town hall meeting of sorts. I want to get right into the topic because we have a very esteemed group of panelists, and we have a very involved community organization that's with us, and we have some very, very important people in our studio audience we're going to meet in just a little bit. A few years ago, the Census Bureau defined Buffalo, New York as the third poorest city in the nation. We're behind Cleveland and Detroit, other Rust Belt cities that have had economic challenges, just like Western New York. But what can be done? We see a lot of cranes in downtown Buffalo. We hear about tourism in Western New York. We see all the good things about Western New York. But why is some of the area impoverished? And what can be done to help that across the city and across the state? Now, to that end, there's a community action organization in Western New York. And that's really the impetus of why we're here tonight to do this very special show on how to get rid of poverty and how to find some solutions. It's the Community Action Organization of Erie County. I'll read their mission. The mission to promote opportunities for low-income individuals, families, and communities to achieve and sustain self-sufficiency through advocacy, partnerships, access to services, and low to moderate income housing development. Now, the individual who is in charge of that is a well-known Western New Yorker. You may have seen L. Nathan Hare. I'm sure you've seen him on all the newscasts, involved in the community in Western New York. I certainly covered Mr. Hare when I was at WKBW, and just a little bit of background. He's a very familiar figure at ECC. He's been involved in the community with African history, values, social organization, spent nearly 2 years as the Deputy Commissioner of the Erie County Department of Social Services, and for 5 years as the Commissioner of the Erie County Department of Youth Services. He's a very inspirational man, and I think you're going to find that from what he's done in the community, like Neighborhoods United for Restoration, teaching upliftment, recreation, and education. He's a storyteller, a playwright, and author. Some call him Father Africa. Nathan is a father, godfather, and mentor to the community. So a round of applause for L. Nathan Hare, who's joining us tonight. Our next guest on the panel is Marie Cannon. Marie is the first Deputy Commissioner of Erie County Social Services. She presently oversees the Family Independence Portfolio. She was selected by the Governor of New York State to sit on the Governor's Children's Cabinet Advisory Board. Her community involvement, besides being past president of the Buffalo and Erie County Girl Scouts, is director and treasurer of Breath of Life Ministries. A Canisius College graduate, received a master's degree from the University at Buffalo, and we welcome Marie Cannon to our panel here today. Next, we have Dr. Curtis Haynes, Jr., for 20 years in Western New York at Buffalo State College, a professor there. His articles have been published in several journals across the United States. Titles like Self-Transformation and Forgotten Four-Fifths, Reading in Black Political Economy. He's a former Buffalo Common Council member, served there in 2010 in the Ellicott District. He's a distinguished visiting scholar, and as an educator, over 30 years experience using popular education tools applied to the field of economics. So we'll find out how education plays into this. We welcome Dr. Curtis Haynes. And from Albany, Carla, and I'm going to get this name, Carla. I've been practicing it all day. DiGirolamo. There you go. I'm not Italian, and I have to say DiGirolamo. But Carla is the Chief Executive Officer of the New York State Community Action Association, and she is the Chief Operating Officer of Unity House at Troy, Director of Policy of the New York State Coalition Against Domestic Violence, and is a skilled manager, trainer, teacher, and activist with a lifelong commitment to anti-poverty, nonviolence, and social justice. All right, we welcome Carla to our panel here today. All right. Nathan, I guess we'll have to start with you, because when we define poverty, how is it, from what you've seen, that Buffalo has the unfortunate distinction of being the third-ranked city across the United States? How did we get into this spot?
Well, the core of that is the loss of the steel industry and the related manufacturing operations that revolve around the steel industry. We also lost a large chunk of our auto industry. Our aircraft industry, Twin Industries, used to be a part of Buffalo as well. We lost somewhere in the area of 60,000 jobs in heavy manufacturing and steel casting and so on. Then the spin-off jobs from those jobs represented another 40,000 jobs we lost within our area. As a consequence, we lost around 250,000 of our people. Of course, if 250,000 of your people leave, then the people who serve those people also leave. So we had this downward, sort of a spiraling downward sound, okay, in terms of what was happening within Buffalo. We have not been successful over the course of the years, the past 40 years, in developing a new economic base that replaces the economic base that we have lost. So we've got to work on things like our healthcare industry, which is one of our health services field is one of the largest industry areas in our county. Our ability to be able to exploit our border, which we have not done well in terms of the 7.2 mile shoreline that we have in the city of Buffalo, our proximity to Canada. So there are opportunities that Buffalo has, and we're only now beginning to grow those opportunities in our area.
So Nathan, what motivated you to put together this community action organization? How did this organization come to be? Was it as a result of the job loss in the Western New York community?
No, the Community Action Organization has been around for 49 years. This is the Erie County's agency that implements the war on poverty that was started by President Lyndon Johnson back in 1964. The Economic Opportunity Act created the funding base for community action agencies around the country. Every county in the United States at some point had a community action agency. We're the designated community action agency for Erie County.
Maria, I'll come to you because working with Erie County, which is obviously where the city of Buffalo resides in, you deal with people all the time on a very, I would think, a very personal level. And I have to think that poverty hits people on very different levels. Some people may just all of a sudden find themselves in an unfortunate situation because of a job loss. Others might be in what we've heard of as the cycle of poverty. Explain what you do with the Department of Social Services.
Okay, right now I serve as the First Deputy Commissioner for Family Independence, and that portfolio includes employment, really trying to reconnect the unemployed to the employment sector, daycare, because we do know that daycare costs are like some of the highest in Western New York and New York State. For example, an infant care is up to $11,000 per year. So if a mom or a parent is going to work, she needs subsidy and support to pay for the child care. So it's child care, it's daycare, it's employment, it's temporary assistance, where people are coming in, and when we talk about the 100% of the poverty level, is that people are walking into our doors without any other resources. And as Mr. Hare said, it comes down to employment and livable wages. So we're like the last resort. When people come into our doors, they've exhausted all of their resources, all of their income, and and sometimes it's a combination of just being recently laid off. And people that recently laid off, they come to our doors at a 3 to 6 months, probably more like 4 to 6 months beyond when their unemployment benefits ran out, because this is going to be usually their first time coming into our door. So they've tried every other avenue. So by the time we see them, they really have exhausted their savings. They've sold their cars. They're on the verge of being evicted. And then we provide the other emergency services like homelessness. We're seeing a change in the face of homelessness. We've seen a 26% increase in families, mostly mothers, but parents coming into homeless shelters with children. And for 26% increase over last year, that's huge. So we're providing the basic, very basic necessities for people to live.
We'll talk more about how that impacts versus the city versus the suburbs in a little bit. I'll move to Dr. Haynes because, in the education world and how you've experienced what you've done in economics, how can we generate an economic engine? How can we jumpstart that engine to talk about these jobs that Nathan said don't exist? And is that really the core of it from what you see?
Well, clearly we do need to jumpstart the opportunity for employment. Myself in the educational industry, what I'm finding now is that a lot of people are continuing their education in the industrial age. right? You were able to get a job at Bethlehem Steel, at General Motors, with basically a junior high education. You could even be a junior high dropout and get a decent job during the industrial age. But now we're in the information age. Now we're in the knowledge age. And what I am finding in the college and university setting is that a lot of our students are treating education no longer as a luxury good, but as a necessary good. People are going to college, right, with the assumption that the college will create better opportunities for employments. Like I've done surveys in my classes, and I would say over probably in the last 5 or 7 years, when I'd ask a class of about 90 to 100 students, 5 years ago, when I asked a class of 90 or 100 students, how many of you are planning on getting a master's degree? Out of those 90 students, probably maybe 7 of them would say they're planning on going to get a master's degree. Now, when I ask that question, I would say almost half of that class is considering going to get a master's degree, under the assumption that more education is going to provide a better opportunity for employment.
And we'll talk more about that, particularly in how the Buffalo Public Schools are in a bit of a state of disarray at this point, and how that might help. Carla, from your perspective, coming in from Albany, what's the take on the state? Is there too much aid being given in? Do people just fall into the trap of, well, I can't get out of this cycle, so to speak, so they just take what aid is available to them? Or is the state more involved, as we've seen with some of the startup campaigns, to generate the kind of jobs that we just discussed?
Well, the whole issue of addressing poverty is sort of interesting. As Mr. Hare said, the federal government really assumed responsibility in 1964 for sort of putting the boots on the ground. And then you see agencies like CAO. The paradox is, though, that poverty hits home here in Buffalo, here in New York State, on the streets of New York State. So there's sort of a disconnect from the place that theoretically is setting the policy and sending the money down to the state. Now, in New York, right now, we have a governor who has done some things, I think, to mitigate the impact of some of the policies that are coming out of Washington. He has agreed to protect us from some of the food stamp cuts. But we have a real challenge because, as I say, there's this sort of sense that, addressing poverty is on the one hand Washington's job, but on the other hand, where it's going to really sort of take place is in the communities. That's where the jobs are going to take place. That's where the people are. So we really have, I think, a disconnect in our policies. And I would like to say that the notion that people sort of give themselves up to this cycle of poverty really isn't borne out in reality. That people who are low-income people, first of all, most people who live in poverty are there for a short period of time. We get real stuck on this sort of cycle, this generational thing, but most people are in poverty for 2, 3, 4 years, due to a divorce, due to a job loss, due to some other circumstance. They then move themselves out, and they move themselves out with the help that we have historically offered. So one of the things that we're here to talk about is making sure that those ladders of opportunity, which are the resources and the services that were there to help people when I was coming up, are being pulled away. And without that help, we're not going to be able to continue to move forward.
All right, you've met for our panel. We'll hear from our studio audience when we come back, when Political Buzz continues right after this. Interesting, that startling statistic there, poverty much higher way back when. I'm joined now by a member of the board of the Salvation Army. Your name, sir?
Bob Coor.
And, with the not-for-profit entities in Western New York, is it something that you're tasked with to help individuals out? And how do people come to you to get help from the organization that you're with?
Well, I think people recognize the Salvation Army as an organization with a lot of dedicated volunteers, a lot of people that are really involved, that have really a goal to meet the needs of the community. And I turn that around and say to this organization, are there gaps in the level of services that we could provide to meet the needs of the community?
Well, Nathan, do you want to take that?
One of the good things about the Salvation Army is it provides a base for emergency housing for people who are in really desperate straits. And then the Salvation Army provides services to try to connect those people to other services. Obviously, they can't be in more than so many places at one time. So the array of other support services that we have in Erie County become the tools that Salvation Army is able to use to try to help the people that come to their doorstep. So that's what the Community Action Organization tries to get done, and does this in concert with other organizations in our county. We try to look at what are the needs that people have in order to mitigate the condition that they find themselves in. They need food, they need clothing, they need daycare, they need transportation, a whole array of things. Once we get those needs stabilized, then we have to figure out a way to get people income security so that they can provide those things for themselves. Some people may not be in a position to get enough income security given the kind of skill sets that they have, so they have to have their skills improved in order to be able to get enough dollars per hour that they can support themselves and the family structure that they are in.
Now, what I've noticed too is the community is a very generous community, and people, absolutely give of their hearts, but there's only so much, that can happen. What are your needs for the Salvation Army? What do you need to help make your organization work?
Well, I think it's the relationships with the other organizations so that we can meet those needs. I mean, we're constantly looking at opportunities to support the needs of the community, but I think there's always a need for more communication to make that happen.
Absolutely. We have another lovely young lady here in the audience. We have a comment about education here. Stand up. What's your name?
My name is Solar Ingram.
All right, Solar, what's your question?
My question is, as I'm working with college students, I want to understand what resources are available for them so that they don't continuously fall into the lines of poverty. As they're going to school, they may not be working, but food stamps aren't available to them anymore. So we want to know what sources can we offer them to make sure that they're able to finish school, still take care of their families, and of course take care of the resources at hand.
Would that be something for you, Marie, or Dr. Haynes, or both? Well, Curtis, go ahead.
Well, I can't speak on those resources, but what I will speak on is that clearly today in the 21st century, college students are taking more of a burden for their own education, right? More and more college students are paying a higher tuition. Matter of fact, today in 2014, the total debt associated with going to school is greater than credit card debt. And in part, that's a function that people do understand how important education is, but now we're in this, we have to do this cost-benefit situation. College, debt, and our students are really facing a very critical situation right now. Do we go into $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 debts to get jobs that are only providing $20,000, $30,000 a year? Those are some serious questions that our students have to deal with.
What is your connection to education? What do you do?
I am a high school coordinator for Bryanton Stratton College, so I am able to go into the schools and speak with the students. And one of the fears that I hear in the position that I'm in is, does it make sense to go to school if I'm not going to be able to eat and study? I'm not going to be able to live and study. So when you're thinking about the war on poverty, I think that there should be more resources available or noticeable for students that are in those positions.
And Carla, is that something that the state needs to make more well known to some high school students, that there's state aid available?
Absolutely, because as the professor said, it is, I think, an important sort of calculation that people have to make around the value of education. But for many people, education is that ticket out. So I think to the extent that there are resources there, that we absolutely need to promote them and we need to talk about them. And perhaps we need to push our college communities too, to where there aren't resources. If people are not eligible for resources, those colleges need to make them available. Is there a way that we can make available free or low-cost food services? Is there a way that the college community can provide support? Because I think part of what the community can do, in addition to providing those hard services, food, is to create a community of support. And the college community is a really good opportunity to do that, to help people get through those tough moments and to come together in a way that will allow you to sort of make that journey. But I think it's really important, if we really have closed those resources off to college students while at the same time we're telling them this is your ticket out, well, there's a real hypocritical sort of message we're giving there. And I think we need to call our government officials on that. I think we need to push our college campuses and say, you need to help us solve this problem.
Well, I know college debt can last for decades, it feels, with so much of the debt that is mounted up. Marie, go ahead. You have a comment, then I was going to ask you something else.
I would concur with Carla that it really is, I think, opportunity for advocacy, because in terms of from a social services standpoint, there are federal mandates that would say either you can or you cannot support a college student going to school. So I think it behooves the community, because we have to follow the regulations in terms of the determined eligibility. But there's opportunity in terms of advocacy on a federal level to really push those kinds of concerns that this lady just surfaced.
Let me talk a little bit about the city versus the suburbs, and we'll do a quick wide shot here of our studio audience. How many of you are from the city of Buffalo? Show of hands. Okay. And how many of you live in a suburb of Erie County? Okay. So I'd say it's 80-20 is how it would be. And Marie and Nathan, where do you see, is it mostly poverty in the city, or are you seeing it now spreading out more to suburban areas as the population shifts?
I'm really glad you asked that question, because this is a myth that has been around for a very long period of time. People think that the majority of poverty in Erie County is in the city of Buffalo. In reality, 61% of all of the poor in Erie County live outside of the city of Buffalo. We just completed a strategic needs analysis for our county that we use to develop our strategic plan for over the next 3 years. One of the things that we found is that when you look at the census tracts that border Erie County, there are 7 of those census tracts that when you look at them, you find that the indicators of poverty are identical in those census tracts that are on the border outside of the city of Buffalo as you would find inside the city of Buffalo. So it's important that we understand in terms of how we make decisions about allocating resources and our strategy on how we're going to help the poor, that we understand who the poor are, where the poor are, what the conditions are of those people who are poor. If you're 55 years old and your company decided that we don't want to be here anymore, we're going to sell our company to Ireland, and then they don't want to pay your pension benefits, and you find yourself thinking that you were going to get $4,000 a month out of your pension, and now you're going to get $1,000 or maybe nothing, suddenly you find that you need the services that Marie is talking about in her division of the County Department of Social Services. So this is a lot of the issue that we have to wrap our arms around in terms of setting policy and strategy in our county.
At the risk of, and I don't want to single anybody out, but I would think that if somebody reaches a level where they feel like they have no way out, I have to believe that that takes an emotional toll on them and their families. Talk to me about that, because I have to believe that that's something that would be very difficult to handle when your family's faced with that, and you have to go to your family and say, you know, the job situation is as such, and we can't do this, and we have to do something that we wouldn't have ever thought we would have had to do.
Well, there are so many people in our county who face the very circumstance that you have described. We have to remember that most people do not aspire. In fact, I don't know of anybody who aspires to be on public assistance. So when that event occurs in somebody's life, an awful lot of things had to have gone wrong in a fairly short period of time to drive somebody into a position where they felt they had to go to social services to be able to make a living stand. And so we have to be able to provide our support for the poor in a way that takes into account all of the people that are around that person who is in the impoverished situation, who ends up in, say, Marie's services. She can't provide those services in isolation from the other members of the family or the cluster that that person is in. They have to find a sense of being assured or confidence that the pool of services the person is in is going to help that person to get out of that impoverished condition.
Dr. Haynes, we have about a minute left in this segment. You were Buffalo Common Council member in 2010, Ellicott District. We just went through a rather contentious school board election. How important are the Buffalo Public Schools in generating an educated student body to help move the city forward?
Oh, clearly they are significantly important, but I mean we have to be clear that education is not a neutral concept. Education is there's different kinds of education. Like one of the focuses right now are on scholastic education, pushing core requirements all the way down into preschool. But there are other forms of education. We have to clearly be aware that we've made a transition from an industrial age to a knowledge age to an information age. The rules of the games have changed. One thing about Buffalo, right? When I came to Buffalo, there was from my perspective, a psychological and emotional depression that corresponded to 50 years of economic depression. The last years of the industrial age were very difficult in the city of Buffalo. But now Buffalo is making a turn. So clearly what we need to do now is when we, with the education that is in our school systems, we need to, from my perspective, we need to expand it just from scholastic education, reading, writing, arithmetic, but we also need to include financial education. We also need to include professional education. We also need to develop a form of critical analysis, critical thinking. We also need to include a form of creative thinking. We also need to include constructive thinking. All those things are the kinds of things of the 21st century. Clearly the industry, the most important industry of the 21st century is the industry that's associated with making human beings better.
All right, we have a few remaining moments in this half hour of our special two-parter on poverty in Western New York and Buffalo. We'll be back right after this. There it is. You can join the conversation at WBBZ on Twitter and like us at WBBZ-TV on Facebook. We have a very active studio audience, and this was the first half hour of what will be a two-parter. So next week we'll continue this discussion. I want to thank our panelists because they're going to join us next week. L. Nathan Hare is the CEO of the Community Action Organization. Marie Cannon, First Deputy Commissioner of Social Services in Erie County. Dr. Curtis Haynes, Jr., Associate Professor, Buffalo State College. And Carla DiGirolamo from Albany, New York State. We're going to have more with those folks and with our studio audience when Political Buzz comes back next week, Thursday at 9 a.m. and Sunday at 11 on WBBZ-TV, your hometown television station.